How you guys doing out there? My name is Kyle. Today I'm going to be reviewing Star Trek Beyond, which is not directed by J.J. Abrams. This is now directed by Justin Lin, who has helmed many of the Fast and Furious movies, and stars Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, the beautiful Zoe Saldana, Karl Urban, John Cho, and of course, the late, great Anton Yelchin. In this movie, Kirk, of course played by Chris Pine, is dealing with some problems. He's having concerns about his age because he's on a 5-year expedition with the Enterprise, but he's also concerned about where his place is in life.
My dad joined Starfleet because he believed in it. I joined on a dare.
Once traveling through a very dangerous nebula in uncharted regions, the Enterprise comes under attack in one of the best action sequences ever for a Star Trek movie, which causes the entire crew to be stranded on a forbidden planet, no pun intended, to the awesome 1956 film. The crew of the Enterprise is now up against a dangerous villain called Krall, who's played by Idris Elba, which I'll talk about later on in this review. So what did I think about Star Trek Beyond? This movie is getting a ton of praise from a lot of critics saying, you know, they didn't go in with a lot of expectations, but once they saw the movie, they really exceeded them. And then there are some people who walked in with high expectations and found themselves to be very underwhelmed. Now, I have to be real with you before I talk about my thoughts on Star Trek Beyond. I am not a Star Trek fan. I'm not really a fan of the movies because, quite honestly, most of them feel very dated, and to me, they just feel like passable entertainment. They feel like movies that you watch and they're very forgettable. I feel like the previous two movies, while having some fun in them and, of course, having lens flares, they just felt like very generic, run-of-the-mill movies, and they didn't really have a lot of special things for me. The only reason I have the other two Star Trek films is because my folks really love Star Trek. So with all that in mind, would it surprise you that I thought this movie was just meh? Because that's exactly how I felt. Now, this isn't a terrible movie at all. It does have good moments, but I can't really say it's a disappointment either or a letdown because I didn't go in expecting anything. And I'll say that for, I'd say about 60% of the movie, I was pleasantly surprised because there were some fun sequences in them. And I think Justin Lin did a good job directing the action sequences because the action is done so incredibly well, especially when it's in close combat. They really feel like Fast and Furious action sequences, but those sequences are filled with just awesome kinetic punches. The motion of the camera following the actors was just spectacular. In terms of character build-up, I can positively say they did a great job building the relationship between Spock and Bones. I think they really were fantastic, and I think the combination of Quinto and Karl Urban were probably my favorite things about this movie, because whenever Karl Urban would make a joke, it was always funny.
Well, that's just typical.
And I think that's thanks to the fact that Simon Pegg was actually on the screenwriting team for this movie, and Simon Pegg has obviously been known for making really good comedies like The World's End, Hot Fuzz. So whenever he makes a joke, it's always really funny, and every single joke in this movie was really funny.
Pardon me.
I'm not a fan of Chris Pine, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure he's a great person in real life, and he's probably a really nice guy, but I'm just not a fan of him playing Kirk. Especially in that original movie in 2009, I did not like his character one bit. There was nothing about him that made me want to root for this guy, and it really hurt the character build-up of Kirk. It's somewhat improved in Into Darkness, and I think in this movie it's definitely a solid improvement. I think each movie Kirk's character gets better. Zoe Saldana is beautiful as always, but my problem is her character didn't really get to do much. She was really behind the scenes throughout the film, and I'm not really going to spoil anything, but for me personally, I really felt like she needed more screen time. Because I think the best addition to the cast was none other than the actress who plays Jayla. I think she did a spectacular job. She was a badass female character. And I think that's awesome how we're going to get another female character who's not over-sexualized. She doesn't need to be this blonde in a bikini. She can be badass on her own, and I think she does a really good job in this movie. Now, before I discuss my major issues with the movie, I just like to say this. If any of you guys are Star Trek fans, chances are you're going to love this movie. You're going to walk into it and just have a complete and total blast of 2 hours. The problem I have is the story of this movie is paper thin. It is extremely predictable, generic, cliched. It's nothing you haven't seen before. Now let's talk a little bit more about Justin Lin's direction. I think his direction over the action sequences are terrific. I think the action in this movie really looks great, but the other direction I felt was a little bit uneven. I felt like the pacing of this movie was at times very fast, then there were other moments where it just kind of got really, really slow, and I was kind of bored. I also felt like the editing of this movie was a little bit choppy. I felt like there were some sequences that could have been taken out because this movie should have been at least 25 minutes shorter. Now let's talk a little bit more about the villain Crawl. Throughout the first hour of this movie, he just felt like another run-of-the-mill, generic, stupid, forgettable villain. However, during the second half of the movie, you start to learn a little bit more about him and you realize, oh, and you can finally start to get behind this guy and understand why he did what he did. Now before I give my grade for this movie, I just like to pay a little bit of respect to Anton Yelchin. It is very upsetting to me that this young man is now dead because he died way too soon. And every time I saw him in this movie, I just felt a wave of emotion. And when they paid tribute to that man at the ending of the film, I just almost had a tear come down my eye because it was just so impactful to me, as well as paying tribute to Leonard Nimoy. Fantastic job, guys. So what do I think about Star Trek Beyond? Do I think it's a horrible movie? No. Do I think it's a great movie? No. In terms of fun, this might actually be the most fun I've had within the entire trilogy because the action I think is really handled well. Despite the fact that the pacing was very uneven, when it gets exciting, it is totally exciting, and I like the fact that they had it in a very contained environment because I felt like you could just expand on the characters more. And yes, guys, there are a ton of over-the-top action sequences all throughout this movie, but when it gets to be grounded and realistic, I think those are the best scenes, and that's something that the previous two films just didn't have. So in the end, guys, I'm going to give Star Trek Beyond a B-. Like I said before, if you are a Star Trek fan, chances are you're going to love this movie, but if you're not, proceed with caution. But anyway, guys, what did you think about Star Trek Beyond? I'd love to hear all those comments, so send them in the comment section below. And guys, thank you so much for watching my reviews as always. You guys are the greatest. Thank you so much. And I am so pumped for Jason Bourne next week. I can't wait. I know that movie's going to be great. So guys, thank you so much as always for watching, and stay tuned.